Okay, so this session is entitled Monitoring and Oversight, What is Good Information? And the good information will come from these two gentlemen because they are the experts, and Bill Franz and Mark Pale really help monitor everything that the institution's coordinating board does. So they are here, like I said earlier, really to advise and help. So when you see or get letters from them, it's not always bad, but you pay attention is what I would say for your institutions. And believe me, your chancellors and presidents and government affairs folks know all about this. But we're here to help, again, and they are too, because when presidents, chancellors see their letterhead or their names or calls, it's serious. But again, we're here to help and alleviate issues before they come up. And if they do come up, solve them, right? Work together. So the board information, revenues and expenditures, we talked about the flow of students from K-12 schools to college and through to the labor market. We talked about a little bit. We've got Dr. Nolan Pettis, who's president of the Harlingen ISD, knows all about this because he's, worked very hard over the years in terms of making sure that our students get high grades, and they did this past session for the state of Texas. And I'll tell you, that's the pipeline to higher education, right? So we all need to be informed about that, obviously, in order to get the pipeline going into higher education. How personnel are used is important for our information for you to know. Comparisons with peer institutions, patterns of spending, and major spending goals and standards. Officers of or employees of the institution whom board reasonably believes to be reliable and competent in matters presented, legal counsel, public accountants, or others who are professionally expertly competent. They can be your best friends as you look oversight for these universities. Use them as resources. Don't always just call up when there's an issue or you hear about a concern or a problem. Be proactive, right? And I know Bill and Mark, Mark's great. Mark has board members come in and, when we have informations about audits, not only when there are concerns, but board members wanting to know, what are you thinking? What do you think we can do to improve? So I appreciate that, Mark. And Bill, of course, and I are on the phone, even driving home or in the evenings and when things come up with institutions. So, we want to help you. We want to solve issues before they become problems. And if there are concerns, we want to work with you to resolve them. And then a committee of governing board, which he or she is not a member. Reliance on the information that's provided for others, okay? You must be reasonable under the circumstances considering such factors as the source, whether the information is a brief summary or an extensive analysis, and whether the matter is routine or exceptional, or the time frame in which a decision must be made. So again, you want to go to the source, you want to go to your committee chairs, you want to go to your board presidents, you want to be able to have all the information because you will be getting requests on information from your constituents, from your neighbors, legislators. I've had a couple of calls about some system changes last week already. But you've got to find out the whole information, and I did. I called the chancellor. I wanted the information. I wanted, information because I read over this weekend about some of the boards have made one particular board this past week that influenced, some folks that were concerned about some things. But you need to do your due diligence, right? You need to figure out what's going on, why decisions are made. That way you can be able to do that. I think one of the most important things this morning that I heard was that everything you say and do as a board member, you've got to be very careful because you represent not only yourself but the entire board. So you want to make sure and go through your board before you release any personal comments or information because the media is quick to pick up on, Board of Regents so-and-so has said this, and, in the case of, we didn't win the football game last weekend. Do we need to change our defensive coordinator? Again, that example, and we hear those kind of things too, even at the coordinating board. And so, that's not our position to deal with, obviously. Okay, so as representatives of the people of Texas, a board member should know about what? And that's what our experts are going to talk about next. Bill Franz is a seasoned attorney with the coordinating board. Mark Pale, as you know, has served at the Texas A&M system before and is our lead auditor with other auditors underneath him. And when they go in, the coordinating board does random audits too. So it's not just if you hear about an audit coming up about the credit hours or about how the formula funding is spent and things like that. It's a good thing to be able to justify what your universities are doing, and so it's not a bad thing. It's a learning process, right, Mark? Okay, Mr. Franz.
Thank you, Dr. Farias. Let's start talking about finances first. A board member always needs to know about the finances of the institution or institutions over which they have oversight. And what I should preface this with, when we talk about information, let me touch briefly on some information that you're likely to hear this afternoon during the quote-unquote legal presentation. But how does a board member get information? I mean, I think a board member must respect the role of the system chancellor or the institution's president, and they are the chief executive officer on a day in and day out basis of the institution, and they're charged with carrying out the policies set by the board. So while the chancellor or other employees such as the president should be responsive to inquiries from board members, he or she is not particularly obligated to implement a policy initiative only desired by one board member. But board members customarily should not be dealing with lower level staff on a regular basis unless the chancellor or the institution's president has already authorized such dealings. So the information you're going to be getting is primarily going to come at a board meeting and in reports produced after that meeting or prior to that meeting, so that you have a reasonable means of learning about the information and can discuss it intelligently at the board meeting or at your committee meeting. So what your goal is, it seems to me, and what all board members' goals should be, is that the funds available to be spent are spent in an effective and efficient manner. We're on it. Trying to get the biggest bang for your buck, consistent with the institution's priorities. You want to ensure the institutional financial health, so live within your budget and spending categories, if at all possible. And if there's a significant variance from the budget, what's the explanation? Why'd this happen this year? Is this a sign of potential problems looming on the horizon? Or is it likely just a one-time, one-off affair? Know your systems or institutions' reserves and know what they're earmarked for. What amount is unrestricted? You need to be watching the debt closely as well. What's the deferred maintenance situation at your institution? What's the amount? What's the institution's plan for addressing the deferred maintenance? Economic development is other information board members would want to know. They should know about activities in the region that would boost the economic development of that region and benefit the entire state. To what extent is the institution already addressing them, participating in them? Another thing I would think board members would want to know on a regular basis is, what is the success of the private fundraising endeavors conducted by the chancellor or the president, et cetera? Mark will talk about audits and accreditation reports.
Thank you, Bill. Dr. Frias, good morning. So we're going to have a session here in a bit that will do a little bit deeper dive on the issue of auditing, the audit process in the state of Texas, and I'll kind of go into a bit more detail there. But obviously, significant audit findings are should be on your radar as a governing board member or CEO. And those can come from a number of directions. Obviously, internal audit can provide those, as well as the Texas State Auditor's Office, or potentially even program-specific audits. The Federal Department of Education is a big player in this space, and so oftentimes we're looking at findings from those audit firms or from that audit entity, as well as even we had a presentation earlier on the finances of the state. The Texas State Comptroller's Office also has an audit division, and so they look very closely at that fairly small piece of the pie that was described earlier, the state appropriations piece, and so they're going to be looking very closely after the fact at those expenditures and whether or not they complied with the state's many requirements regarding those funds. The other area is related to accreditation findings. Obviously significant. I was looking, I'm sure many or most of you are members of the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools Commission on Colleges as an accrediting body, and so they have some really very themed areas that they're looking at, and so findings in any of these areas would be something that would definitely demand attention. So they list 4 areas, and I'm reading from their website. A mission appropriate to higher education, so they're looking at your institution's mission, resources, programs, and services sufficient to accomplish the mission. Thirdly, clearly specified educational objectives that are consistent with the mission and appropriate to degree offerings. And then lastly, successful in assessing achievement of objectives. So in other words, a sort of a self-improvement kind of perspective, self-policing, feedback mechanisms to improve the enterprise over time.
Board members also want to know about academic programs. After all, that's the reason the university exists primarily. And so you want to ensure that academic programs are the highest quality, consistent with what the institution can actually afford. How do you do that? Is U.S. News and World Report your best source? Doubtful. I think I'd be talking to the chancellor, to the president, and asking specific questions. What are the metrics he or she uses to determine the quality of the programs? Following up on what Mark just mentioned about accreditors, be sure your institution deals with suggestions promptly that come from accrediting bodies, whether it's ABET, whether it's SACS, the Southern Association on Colleges and Schools Mark mentioned, or another accreditor. Take their suggestions seriously. I know that the chancellor and the president at your institution will be taking those seriously. You also want to ensure the economic viability of academic programs. You should be aware of and knowledgeable about collaborations your institution is engaged in with other institutions, both within the state and outside the state. And of course, I would suggest, given their popularity these days, be aware of the success, or not, of online programs. Student health and safety is another area board members would want information on. You, of course, want to ensure that your students are safe and in a healthy environment. But once again, how do you do that? You're not going to patrol the campus yourself. I would suggest reviewing the campus's policies and procedures in the health and safety area. You might wish to ask the chancellor or the president to have the campus police chief, for example, make a presentation to the board regarding the safety as well as the safety policies of the campus. You might want to review the Title IX, the Clery Act report regarding and reporting crime on campus, and ask any questions that triggers in your mind. Student health and safety, of course, is paramount in the minds of the parents who send their kids to your school.
Bill, can I throw something in on that?
Please do.
Yeah, I just want to give a good example of that. Nolan, we were at the University of Texas System Chancellor's Executive Committee, and Chancellor Milliken from the UT system brought in, which I thought was a great report, the head of the UT police department, and he talked about specifically about the safety and all the concerns we have with shootings and things like that going on in schools, public schools, universities, with the UT Tyler situation which they had in the shooting and how they handle that. So I think that's very appropriate. I thought that presentation that the UT system put on for the group was very informative and showed how prepared universities are. And I think it's incumbent for all of us in overseeing higher education and use Regents understand, like Bill saying, this is a key part, is the safety, not only the academic excellence for the students, but also the safety of the students. And I know that that's what keeps up in talking with presidents and chancellors, keeps them up at night to making sure that we have a safe environment. But inquire about your particular schools and systems. So, we kind of understand that goes on, but I think the detail of it was very impressive in what the systems and the universities are doing.
Thank you. I would think board members would also want to know what the institution's strategic plan is, or if you're a system regent, what the system's strategic plan is for the system as a whole, as well as for its component institutions. Delve into that. Assure yourself that you have a fair understanding of the strategic plan or plans as appropriate, and make sure that the institution sticks to its strategic plan or know the reason it wants to vary. Excuse me. Question what the institution is doing to make progress towards its share of the goals and targets of 60 by 30 Texas, which is, of course, the state's plan. There's also substantial amounts of data that you're going to be provided. Given that data can stimulate good questions and enable good, solid decision-making, a board member should become familiar with useful data regarding any number of different things. For example, data on student enrollment and persistence. What's the diversity of your student body? What's the academic preparedness of incoming freshmen? Why is that even important? Well, if they're prepared and prepared well, you're going to have far less remedial courses, far less co-requisite courses, which is a remediation program designed to expedite a student's path into credit-bearing courses. How many dual credit students do you have? Is that a concern? What are your enrollment trends in terms of student body needing co-requisite courses, remedial courses? Are your dual credit students increasing, decreasing, or staying pretty much the same? What are your enrollment trends by major? Is the institution prepared to see increases in a particular area? How will it address those increases in the student population? Is it prepared to go and hire new faculty? What's the plan for majors that are losing popularity? Seems these days that you can't go a week without reading an article in one publication or another without noting that the humanities are no longer as interesting are no longer attracting as many students as they once did. I personally lament that situation, but nonetheless, it's a fact. What's the institution's plan if that's the case for your institution? Other information, other data that you would want is what percentage of students receive financial aid and what type of financial aid? Are we talking Pell Grants, Texas grants, institutional grants? Are we talking loans, federal loans, state loans from the coordinating board? Those are all tidbits of information that can paint a complete picture of your student body. You may already be familiar with the almanac that the coordinating board produces. I would recommend looking at it, becoming familiar with it. It contains you've got it. Contains a lot of data that can be very useful in helping you be an effective trustee, be an effective regent. What are your students' retention rates? Are you retaining at least 90% of your freshman body for the sophomore year? Are you retaining 80%, et cetera? Why is your rate dropping if it is? Why is it increasing if it is? Let's do more of that. Those are all things I think a trustee would want to and should want to know. What are the graduation rates for your students? Particularly the rates for students graduating in 4 years, the rates for students graduating in 5 years. Finally, the rates for students graduating in 6 years. And if it's taking half of your students or more that graduate 6 years, what's the reason? Are they working part-time and over the summers? Do they have internships for 2 or 3 summers during their college career? Just information that I think you'd want to know so that you can help develop plans and programs to better address and better take care of your student body. Other data that I think you'd want to know is about graduates. This is after your folks graduate from your institution. What happens to them? What percentage of your graduates are either employed or in graduate school within 8 months after graduation? It's useful information to have. Passage rates on national licensure exams presumes that your institution has a program or programs leading to licensure, such as nursing, pharmacy, et cetera. What are the average salaries by major for the students at your institution after they graduate? The first year out, 5 years out, 10 years out. What's the debt load of your graduates by discipline? If you major in accounting, do you incur triple the debt of majoring in English? I'm going to hand it to Mark to talk about comparisons with peer institutions.
Just a couple more words, Bill, on the debt thing. We've heard a couple of speakers already talk about Chronicle of Higher Education and Inside Higher Education. So, and even other major media sources. It's very regular that you see articles regarding student debt and some of the situations that's created, and so that's an important topic, is to know sort of what does that look like within your institution? What's the average debt of your graduates coming out of the institution? So the comparisons, there's a lot of different ways of slicing and dicing the data, and we have some data expertise within the coordinating board, and they'll be talking to you more throughout the conference. Dr. Eklund and her team, Dr. Gardner, they do a wonderful job with something called the accountability system, and so that's a system that that you can gain access to. Anyone can gain access to, and it's an interactive way. So we have someone here with the Higher Ed Almanac, and that's got a wealth of information as well. So you can sort of take the Almanac and the accountability system is that on steroids. It allows you to kind of slice and dice and compare yourself to other peer institutions, other statewide metrics, and really very rich information, and information that unlike perhaps some other sources of information that you might hear about in the mainstream media, where you don't know the extent of vetting, you don't know the extent of edit checks and processes to make sure that the data is valid and high quality data. The data that the coordinating board works with, that you see in the Almanac, that you see in the accountability system, is very high quality data. It goes through a rigorous process of cleansing and back and forth with your institutions to resolve questions, and so you can be assured that what you're looking at and making decisions potentially based on that information, that it's very good data. So how to get started? Again, what the beginning of the scientific method is defining the problem, and so it's what metrics are important to your institution. What are the keys? Which ties back to some of the earlier comments about the mission and objectives of your institution. So if SACS is interested in what your institution's mission is, and do the programs support and sustain that mission, then the metrics would be built around the key aspects of your institution's mission, and then finding the information sources, some of which we've discussed, that would allow you to evaluate success or the need to make changes and improve. There's a bullet here: don't ignore the subjective. Oftentimes, I think human intelligence, in the age of dashboards and other indicators, the objective information is important, but also just conversations with key stakeholders, in your within your institution, those that deal with your institution, a healthy way for people to bring forward complaints. That can give you some valuable insight into, particularly if there are complaints that recur, or you start to see a trend of questions or concerns. Those would be things that could be very helpful, and they're not necessarily on a dashboard, but could still give you some real insight into situations. So we've put up some links as far as some of the things that we were just talking about. Certainly, the Coordinating Board General website is it's got a search function. We have 60by30texas.com with all the information about that higher education plan, and then we have the data.org website. So I think I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Farias.
Thank you. I want to thank Bill and Mark both for joining the panel and for helping out today. Appreciate your help. They're available for questions. I'll monitor the questions. They'll handle all the questions. No, I'm just kidding. I also want to recognize the students. You want to raise your hand if you're a student regent? Thank you all for being here. We appreciate your service as well. I just want to go around the room. I mean, I know we have trustees, regents from Texas Southern University. You want to raise your hands? Thank you for being here. We have the University of Houston Board of Regents. Thank you all for being here. University of Texas System Board of Regents. And we have Texas A&M. Anybody here from Texas A&M System? Okay. A North Texas System. Texas State System. Okay, hopefully I'm not leaving anybody out. Texas, of course, Texas Women's University, Stephen F. Austin University. Do we have Texas State? That's mentioned Texas State System? Yes. Anybody else? Am I missing anybody else? I think I've got pretty much everybody. Yes, ma'am.
Were you just asking for board members or representatives from
Both.
Texas A&M University?
Okay, thank you for being here. I knew we had folks from Texas A&M, the University System, or representatives from, so thank you all for being here. So we do have all the systems represented, which is great. Do we have any questions for our esteemed panel? You've got all these experts up here in terms of not only legal counsel, but how can we help make your, I want to say jobs, but your positions helpful to you? Yes, ma'am.
How accessible are you all if we have questions?
Okay.
How accessible are you all if we have questions?
Well, the board is always accessible. You can reach us at the board office. The Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board website has information where you can reach us by email or phone number, or feel free to call, me in my office, and you can find our information on the website. So we're here as a resource. Again, we don't want to be seen as a regulatory. We have a new commissioner, and he's great. I was on the search committee, so the National Search Committee. So I think we did a great job, and I think Commissioner Harrison Keller, even though he Notre Dame undergrad, that's okay. But we've taught him well because he did work for the University of Texas system for many years, and he's great policy guru, I would call him, not only in the state but national, as far as his organization and as far as affiliations with national higher ed circles. But yes, we're all accessible, and you all are invited to tune in to our meetings, just like most of your Board of Regents meetings are online. And I do tune into some of them, so especially when there are topics in the agenda that the coordinating board, has a lot of interest in, and even not. So there are some things that we definitely want to collaborate with, and we're here as a resource. We're not here to say we're going to go audit your university or your systems. We want to be able to help you be very successful as a regent. Okay.
So my question is around the role you play for advocating for the institutions. Specifically, you talked about SACs, and how do you interface with other state agencies like the SAO that has decided that they will no longer perform the Single Audit Act for our student financial aid, forcing us institutions to have to go seek external auditing and at quite a high expense, in my opinion. So it was something that was covered by the SAO. They've elected to stop, and now we're forced to do it on our own.
Okay, so since I've been on the board to 2015, and I see patients still, so the thing is, all these acronyms, and you'll get up to speed. So if you're a new regent or student regent, say, what does all these mean? All these governing bodies and all these things that they're talking about, you will learn. But that's a great question. And being academic chair that I am in Workforce Success, I deal with these organizations, whether they're with medical schools, pharmacy schools, professional programs, or engineering programs, or SACs, all these programs. So they do have a lot of changes that go on. So we need to keep up with all that. So I'm going to let our general counsel, or Mark, address that specifically.
Thank you for the question. SAO is State Auditor's Office, so they're the external auditor for the state of Texas, and they're subject to influences just like other state organizations. So they've gone at least a couple of years under an interim state auditor. So that's certainly impacted some of the deliverables that they've provided. We interact with the State Auditor's Office. We develop our compliance monitoring plan, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, and our internal audit plan for the agency is done in consultation with the State Auditor's Office. We attend the same types of committee-type meetings, professional associations at the State Auditor's Office, and so I think that was a resource decision to push that off on the institutions. Also, part of that, they've contracted for the compliance portion of the single audit. They've contracted with a firm that had done the audit for a couple of decades. This is the first year that we have a new audit firm doing the compliance work under contract with the state auditor's office. So there's a lot of things going on there in terms of changes, and also just in terms of I think it's challenging to affect change or potentially to talk strategy to an agency that continues to be under interim leadership. But, we're still talking with them. They have appointed, your institution obviously would have a designated contact manager with the state auditor's office. And so I would just encourage to keep that dialogue open. Sure.
Yeah, my question's more on the level of what's appropriate and chain of command. As a member of a Board of Regents, I think it was Bill and Lamar had several questions I really liked that I'd like to have the chancellor answer. But is it more appropriate to go through the board chairman first and hope that he gives them to the chancellor, or do you do both at the same time?
Okay, I think I'll address it, and then Bill can also chime in. But I think it's more of a individual decision. If you have a really good relationship with your board chair, and your board chair wants input from all its members, and then I think it would be appropriate to go with your board chair. And if you feel that your communication is not going up the ladder, then I think it would be appropriate you as a board member, to reach out directly if necessary. But I think just in, just to be fair to the board chair, I think it would be important for the board chair to be involved. I mean, that's my opinion. No, we understand that. That's a hypothetical question or situation. And that's an excellent question, actually, because those situations do come up, and boards and members need to feel comfortable on how they approach their leadership and their chancellor. But one very, very important that brings up, and I haven't heard this discussion yet, but we did talk a little bit about public meetings and being very careful. And I know we are at the coordinating board. You will get to know your colleagues, your regents, students, and everyone very, very well over the next 6 years. And you will become close friends with many of them. So you have to be very careful about discussing issues that come before your board and not have a quorum. You don't want a walking quorum. And this is where I'll turn it over to Bill, because he continues to remind us, and he knows I call him all the time. And we have we have issues because we oversee all the university systems and all higher ed. So we have things coming at us right and left all the time. And these are issues that are, in public, I guess, demand and people wanting answers and quickly. But, you have to be really very careful. And I'm on the executive committee with our chair and our secretary. But those discussions, you have to be very careful not to have a walking quorum, and who you discuss with and how many are on your quorum. And those are things that, as new regents, that's probably the biggest thing I would tell you to be very cautious about. And Bill will probably give you some examples that'll scare you, but not to scare tactics, but it's a very serious issue if you get caught up in situations where you go against that quorum rule.
I could not agree more with Dr. Farias. It is one area of the law that is fraught with danger for board members because it's so easy to violate the law and end up passing information along from one board member to another or to a couple of others. It's a normal human thing to do. And then once a quorum is established of people who that information has gone to, arguably there's been a violation of law, which could, if some district attorney chose to, end up in a prosecution. But there's going to be a lot more discussion about that during the legal presentation this afternoon. And so I'd encourage us to, especially given that we're about out of time, I'd encourage us to attend that and listen to that portion of the presentation.
Okay. One last question, and then we need to move on. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Do we have agency? Yeah, we office out here in Austin. So remember, we're a state agency. I said approximately 238. We do not have a library per se, but we have information. So Mary may be able to answer that specifically, although that might be a good idea to have a good resource library, actually.
You might go ahead and look at on your flash drives. You have lots of information. We've downloaded all the information that we can find from the Association of Governing Boards that has been that we can get, that's right on their website. We also have the Attorney General's information. So I would encourage everyone to look at your flash drive. On one of the sheets in your packet, it shows you what's actually on the flash drive, and so that's probably the best resource. And then I would actually encourage you to look at the Association of Governing Boards website, because they have a lot of information, videos and discussions and things like that, that all you have to do is it's www.agb.org. And then, of course, our information also. And we do have, like I shared earlier, the training that you're receiving now is also going to be online and has been online from the last session that we conducted this time last year. And so, and then of course, all of the information about the colleagues that you have is in your packet, and the registrations. So the reason that we publish that, honestly, is because that way, if you have someone that you've connected with here that you want to talk with, then you have their email addresses.
Yes. Quickly, I know we're out of time, but feel free to pull any of us over and ask questions during the conference today and tomorrow if you have something that's on your mind, or if we can help you. Also, Dr. Mary Smith, you help organize everything. Can you give us what do you do besides everything at the coordinating board? Can you let us know your official position, because everyone needs to know Mary. She's a great resource, by the way.
I appreciate that. I'm technically the Assistant Deputy Commissioner for Academic Planning and Policy at the Coordinating Board, and I also serve as the agency's Dispute Resolution Coordinator. You may be getting connections with me through the dispute resolution process that we have when we have a rule that needs to be developed that's based on statute that requires us to do negotiated rulemaking. So I do lots of different projects, essentially. So my responsibility is essentially to do those projects and to organize these kinds of meetings for information facilitation. I like to think of myself as a communication facilitator. So hopefully this whole process and different meetings that we have around the state and our communications do help with communication facilitation throughout the state.
My father was probably the chief cook and baller.
Well, thank you for that, but I have
Okay.
a lot of help. So
Thank you.